Good evening and welcome to the Centre for Geopolitics at Cambridge University. I'm Brendan Sims, the director of the Centre. The Centre for Geopolitics seeks to deepen the study of grand strategy and statecraft at the University of Cambridge and to offer innovative opportunities for collaboration with practitioners. Our guest tonight is His Excellency João Vale de Almeida. Ambassador João Vale de Almeida represents the European Union in the United Kingdom. He previously served as EU Ambassador to the United Nations between 2015 and 2019. Before that, he was the first EU Ambassador to the United States of America from 2010 to 2014. Before I give the floor to His Excellency, I would like to remind you of the format of this event. Our guest will speak for 20 minutes or so, followed by 10 to 15 minutes of discussion with me. Then we will come to questions from you, the audience. Over 200 of you have signed up for this event, and you come from many walks of life around the world, the universities, from politics, from diplomacy, from banking, the armed services, and of course, many Cambridge alumni. You are all welcome. If you have questions that you would like to put to His Excellency, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit them. Please give your name and affiliation if you have one. You can submit questions at any point throughout the event. As always, this event is being recorded and will be made available on our website in the coming days. Now that the formal process of Brexit has been completed, attention is turning to the question of how the two principal unions in Europe, the United Kingdom and the European Union, will relate to each other in future. Will they find a new equilibrium and concentrate on meeting the challenges of the 21st century together? Or will we see a continued ordering struggle which might destabilise our continent? What can or should the United Kingdom do to support the further integration of mainland Europe? To help us answer these and other questions, the Centre looks forward to hearing from João Vale de Almeida. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, Brandon. It's a real privilege to be at Cambridge, although remotely. And my wish is that the next time it will be a real meeting, physically visiting such a prestigious university. I thank you for this invitation. I thank all of those that will attend, and I look forward to our discussion. But let me start by saying that it is a great pleasure to discuss EU-UK relations in a Centre for Geopolitics, led by a distinguished historian. I think this takes us away from what Boris Vian would call l'écume des jours, the foam of the days, which is the daily life of an ambassador in a country that is so close to us, and dealing with the relationship that is going through such a formidable change. And why do I say this? Because I think we need to look at this relationship having in mind the big picture, having in mind the global context, the geopolitical context, but not only. So what I'll try to provide in the next few minutes is a sort of a scene setter for our discussion. I hope it can be useful and it will trigger the curiosity of all of you. And my first point is to say that Brexit, the departure of the UK from the EU, is an unprecedented event within an unprecedented global context. Tomorrow, exactly tomorrow, we will have for the first time a totally new legal, political, institutional, and economic framework for the relationship between one country and a group of countries that have been together for almost half a century. Our separate lives start, in fact, tomorrow. This is the day one after divorce, if you want. and those who have divorced, it's not my case, but those who have divorced tell me that the day one after divorce is a difficult one, and the days after divorce are difficult ones, and the stage after divorce is a difficult one. So that's where we are. We ended the transition period. We ended the provisional application period of the TCA. So I think this is a good moment to take stock and look forward within the perspective and the angle of this big picture. So let me say a few words about why I think that Brexit is an unprecedented event. Well, it's relatively obvious. I think Brexit is, first of all, unique in terms of the political nature of the process. Well, the UK is obviously the first country that decided to leave the European Union. The only one so far, and I hope the first and last. But it's also the first time that we had to negotiate divergence as opposed to negotiating convergence. That's what we normally do when we enlarge to other countries, is how will and how for how long and how under which modalities shall we converge. Well, this is about separation. But it's also the first time that part of a territory of a third country belongs to both the market of that country and for goods, also the single market of the European Union, a part of a country, of a third country. And last but not least, if we're talking about divorce, divorce normally arrive much earlier in a relationship, not necessarily after 47 years of living together. So it's quite unique also from that point of view of divorce politics, if you want. But Brexit is also unique in terms of its relative dimension. And we are talking about the sixth economy in the world, GDP-wise. We are talking about a permanent member, one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. We're talking about a nuclear power, but we're also talking about a country which has an impressive soft power. So all countries are equal, of course, but in this particular case, the relative dimension of Brexit is to be underlined. And the third reason why I think Brexit is unique, an unprecedented event, has to do with the technical complexity of this process. I mean, it's much more difficult, we now realize, to disentangle than to integrate. Particularly if you have to disentangle in a very short period of time, while integration took you a few decades. The asymmetry here is quite striking. The other reason for this technical complexity is the geographic proximity. You know, it's not that we are, negotiating with Japan or Australia. We are negotiating with a country that distances from us 0 kilometers in the island of Ireland and a few dozen kilometers in the Channel. So we cannot change geography. We'll be there forever, very close. And this is, of course, part of the complexity of this relationship and the Brexit process. The other one is, of course, economic interdependence, which is linked, of course, to the geographic proximity, which is linked also to the 47 years of economic and political integration process that we share. And of course, linked to all of this is, of course, the level and the intensity and the degree of competition that will necessarily be part of the reality of this relationship for all these reasons. We should not forget that for the UK, the EU is the first trading partner, and for the EU, the UK is our third trading partner. And all this is interlinked. All this makes, in my view, Brexit an unprecedented event, which of course requires a sophisticated governance. It's not easy to manage. It will not be easy to manage this relationship for all these reasons. But also, this governance, the uniqueness of Brexit, the complexity of it, the sophistication of the governance that is required to make it work, implies and necessitates political investment, mutual trust, and a shared political will to succeed. So for all these diverse reasons, this is, I would dare to say, one of the most complex relationships in the world, one of the most ambitious, and with one of the greatest potentials, but certainly one that is complex to govern, fascinating to see it progress, and that's why I'm so honored to be in this particular position that I have today. I also said earlier that I think this is an unprecedented event that happens in an unprecedented global context, and this is where geopolitics come into our discussion. Let me say why I say this. First of all, I would characterize the global context today. There are different ways of looking at it, but I think for the purpose of our discussion, I would start by saying that we are living in a period of where the liberal order that we built post-Second World War and post-Cold War is being seriously challenged, like I would say never before. For all the reasons you know, the existence of alternative models to liberal democracies, the attraction that these models are having in some parts of our world, this war of narratives, which is of course amplified by the globalization of communication, but also the simultaneous appearance of strong forces of disinformation and manipulation of information using particularly the social media. So this context, this cultural context, if you want, or ideological context, challenging something that some of us thought would be there for the eternity, is a major challenge that sort of is part of the environment in which Brexit happens, and is maybe also somehow explains, at least partially, Brexit. We have, as a second element I would underline, a new big powers rivalry happening in the world, and I'm sure you're studying it on a daily basis. We can't ignore this. As major global actors that we are, the EU and the UK, we cannot ignore this, and this rivalry questions us, challenges us, will force us to make choices and to adapt our behavior, and also try to influence that relationship as well. The third point I would highlight, and the order is not necessarily a rational one, but I would say in the domain of external relations, I see more and more the impact of national populism at the national level, having a major impact in external relations, in foreign policy, in trade policy. I was part of those who launched the TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership with the United States when I was ambassador there. And I think TTIP was the first victim of trade becoming a political issue, and some elements of the populist discourse having an impact on trade policy. Just an example, but today you cannot separate external relations from domestic policy or political tensions, and particularly coming out of the populist wave of thinking. The other element I would say is that we are talking about Atlantic countries here to a large extent. The EU is an Atlantic actor, so is the UK. And I think we need to see this also in terms of the relationship between the Atlantic and the Pacific. you know, these two areas in dialogue in the world today. And the last point I will highlight would be that this happens in a moment in which the capacity of single countries on one side and regional groupings on the others, their effectiveness in dealing with all these elements of the global context is being questioned. You know, can a single country, even with the size of the UK, is it fully capable of addressing and being effective and in the protection of its values and in interests in this context? What about a group of countries, maybe less cohesive than a single country by definition, but maybe with more increased capacity to act as compared to a single country? And how does this play? But also the interaction between single countries and groups of countries in their same region. This interaction is being put in, or at least challenged by the global context. And of course, all this happens in a time, in the period of which we hope will not last for too long, of a global pandemic and a global recession. So this is the environment of Brexit today, which makes it, you know, as I said, an unprecedented event in an unprecedented global context. My next point is to see how do we manage this relationship. I would call it the EU-UK relationship 2.0. How do we respond to these elements of uniqueness of the Brexit and its context? Let me start by saying that as from tomorrow, we have the framework, we have the tools, we have the infrastructure of the foundations of our relationship with the withdrawal agreement and its different protocols and the trade and cooperation agreement. This is the basis for our relationship. And we should be very clear, we are not going to renegotiate this framework anytime soon. It's just been agreed. TCA will be formally in place tomorrow. It has been in provisional application only for the last 4.5 months. So no time to renegotiate, clear. It's time to implement. It's time to implement well and fully and accurately these two agreements. But we also know that every relationship is an evolving relationship. It's a living relationship. And I think we have to also keep that in mind, that we have this framework, we need to have it work, but it will evolve, and we need to be able to make it evolve in the right direction. There will be these will be dynamic realities, right? You know, how will the business react? How will the citizens react? How will governments react to the new situation? You know, to be interesting to follow. Also, the agreements have some unfinished business. You know, there are review clauses, there are processes that are not yet fully accomplished and finished. So there is unfinished business in this framework that would also create its own dynamic. And then we have, of course, the evolution of context. We don't know how the EU will evolve. We don't know how the UK will evolve. We don't know how the world will evolve. So all these elements make us, should make us realize that while we have to implement what the framework that we have and implement it well, we also need to be ready and able and capable of adapting to the dynamics inside and outside this agreement. So we have the framework, and if we have this kind of awareness of the need to adapt and adjust, I think it is good and it's important to have that. But do we have the vision? Do we have the vision of what we want to do together? I think it's a good question for an academic context environment. what do I see as a practitioner, as an ambassador involved in this, at the very heart of it? I think we've been, and we have to realize that, very much absorbed by this traumatic 4.5 years since the referendum. It's been quite a period of. I won't go back to all the stages of this process, but it's been quite traumatic, quite intense, and we just got out of it, right? It's too soon to have enough distance from this period. We just came out of a very difficult negotiation, a very complex negotiation. And then we had, and I wanted to underline this because sometimes people overlook this, we reached the deal on TCA on Christmas Eve. And this TCA was supposed to be and was applied provisionally, but applied in application on the 1st of January. Well, if my calculation is not wrong, this is about a week. So an unprecedented agreement as a result of an unprecedented negotiating following an unprecedented event had a week to be transposed to reality. And that's what I call an abrupt transition. I don't think anyone had time, or only a few people had time to read the 1,200 pages of the agreement between Christmas Eve and the 1st of January, let alone to be able to apply it in a very effective way. So I think we need to be humble and realize that the first 100 days that were, finished a week or so ago, first 100 days of this post-Brexit were about adaptation and adjustment. At the same time, we had a number of irritants that you well know around the Northern Ireland Protocol, around vaccines who have nothing to do with Brexit, but were part of our bilateral relationship. About also, the diplomatic status of myself and the delegation, and a few other issues that sort of polluted the atmosphere in these first 100 days. We had some unilateral actions from the British government that did not facilitate things. They forced a legal action on our side. And most of all, in these first 100 days, I think we need to regret that the levels of trust went down, and they need to come up. And that's important that we do everything we can to create, the good conditions of mutual trust, mutual confidence between these two, the UK and the United and the EU. So how do I see the next 100 days, which are starting now until, let's say, somewhere in summer? I've seen and I'm seeing some positive signs on a number of elements of the relationship in that characterized the first 100 days. I see progress in our discussions on the Northern Ireland Protocol. I see in other areas also, a better atmosphere, I would say. So my hope is that now that we have all the tools in place, that we can have a first meeting of a joint partnership council, which is the superstructure of the organization of our relationship very soon, in the coming weeks, ideally. That we can make all the different committees, specialized working groups, start common work, teams on both sides looking at the issues, how to implement, how to solve difficulties that may appear. I think with all this, I hope we can create a new momentum for this relationship, and that we focus on implementing well, making the two agreements work to the benefit of our citizens and our business. Now, to conclude, and to give some sort of impulse for our discussion, what are the challenges and what should be the focus of our action in the foreseeable future? I would mention 6 points. The first is trust, trust, trust. We need to increase the levels of mutual trust in this relationship so that it can be fully productive. Second, in doing so, we need to try, and when I say we, and I was misquoted the other day on this, when I say we, I'm talking about the two parties. I'm not talking about the European Union. I'm talking about us as a partnership. We need all to contribute to a new mindset in this relationship, one that is not looking at the past, not scoring points on past disputes, but looking into the future, as we mentioned earlier. The third challenge, or the third focus I would like us to concentrate on, is to make the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement work, again, to the benefit of citizens and business. Number four, global challenges. We are responsible global actors. Climate change, multilateralism, technology, G7, G20, United Nations, in all these areas and fora, I think there's a lot we can do together. Number five, foreign policy and security. What do I see in my radar? I see Iran, JCPOA. We have been founders of it. We want it to work. We are actively pursuing that. In our common neighborhood, from Ukraine to Libya, Africa, which is very close to both of us, and a serious impact in our societies, and a major partner for now and the future. The Indo-Pacific, China and Russia, and the United States. So I give you a few elements of, in the area of foreign policy and security. There are many more where we could interestingly focus our attention. The last but not least, of course, values. The values that we share and the values that we need to promote maybe more than ever now. Democracy, human rights, rule of law. I'll stop here, wishing that this can be a good appetizer for our discussion. And again, I thank you for hosting me, and I thank all those who are following us for attending this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I think you've set out very clearly the dimensions of the challenge posed by Brexit, the independent weight that the United Kingdom has in the world, which you very clearly recognize. The long history, of course, that connected the United Kingdom to the European Union. And you look forward to a new relationship, which will be based not least on geography, which of course is a factor we emphasize very much, as you said, at the Centre for Geopolitics. But of course, you're aware that there are many people in the UK government at the moment who don't really see the UK's destiny as lying in Europe. Frequently, they will say, we're still part of Europe, but the watchword, the slogan really is Global Britain. And I'd like to start with that because, and some questions already coming in that connection, but it was striking reading the recent integrated review that the European Union or Europe, mainland Europe, tended to be mentioned more in terms of challenges from Mr. Putin in the East, perhaps even with Spain over Gibraltar. And the opportunities were largely defined as lying, as being global, as lying in other parts of the more dynamic, economically dynamic world. How did you react to that integrated review? Were you satisfied with it, or would you have preferred a different emphasis?
Well, first of all, I think it's a very impressive document, and I congratulate the authors and the government for producing that. I think it's very important in today's world, in the context that I telegraphically characterized. It's very important that we know what we want to do, how we want to proceed in this world. So I welcome that. It's a very interesting piece, and I read it with great interest. We would have preferred a more engaged approach towards the cooperation with the European Union. I'm not going to deny that we see a potential in our relationship that maybe is not fully reflected in this integrated review, to be very frank and personal about it. That does not mean that it cannot happen. And I don't think that the contents of the review should refrain us or limit us in our ambition to find common ground between us, for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. Because it makes sense in today's world for countries that share so much in terms of values and interests to look for ways and means to cooperate. And I'm confident, to be very frank with you, I'm confident that we will find ways to do that in a sort of incremental way, maybe case by case, looking at different situations where it makes sense and it's mutually beneficial to cooperate. We had proposed, as you know, a framework for cooperation on foreign policy and security within the negotiations for the TCA. The British government chose not to join us in that discussion, but our High Representative is coming next week for the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting. So, and that's a good example where cooperation can take place and we can join efforts. I mentioned JCPOA. We are actively pursuing together that, and in many other areas. Let's see how it evolves. I hope it will be a dynamic cooperation, regardless of the absence of, or in spite of the absence of a formal framework.
If we could just stick with the topic of global Britain for another minute or two, and there's an interesting question here from Aaron Dawson, who's at King's College London. And he says that the European Union, of course, sees itself as a third pole in world politics, vis-a-vis, of course, the United States and the PRC. And what he wonders is whether global Britain isn't somehow a challenge, in some ways subversive or unhelpful towards that project.
No, I don't see it that way. I see, what I see is a world that is, challenging our interests and challenging our values. And to a large extent, the values are the same between us and the UK. There's no daylight between us on that. The interests are largely the same. Most of our member states are members of NATO as much as the UK. And we live in the same part of the world. The neighborhood, our neighborhood affects equally the UK and the EU. We have big partners to the east. We share a transatlantic commitment with the US and Canada, and so forth, and so much more in commonality of values and interests. So, if that is the case, I think there shouldn't be no competition in the pursuit of those common goals. We have to do it in a different, now that the UK has left. But I don't see an opposition. I don't see one excluding the other. I don't see that being, we would have preferred the UK to stay in the EU. That's our position. But once that they've decided and they're out, we need to find ways to complement each other, to converge where we can. And that's what I think we will do in the coming months and years, and I'm confident that will be the case. But it's also clear that the EU wants to occupy its space. The EU is determined to play a global role, and it's an obvious global player. And we are looking at ways and means to strengthen our capacity to act as a global player, as you know. And this process can well coexist with a cooperation with the United Kingdom when we agree and when we see interest in cooperating on both sides. So
the question of how this relationship is managed for the future has obviously been central to your remarks. Ian Bond from the Centre for European Reform, of course you'll know well, he's wondering whether you see any moderation in the UK government's unease about working directly with the EU. I mean, of course, it has preferred to work with bilaterally with the individual member states. And if I could add another question to that, is how helpful do you think concepts like the E3 are, for example, that that the UK would work with Germany and France? Don't they tend to undermine the cohesion of the European Union?
Yep. Well, thank you. Let me say a word to Ian. We served together in Washington. We are good friends, and he's doing a remarkable job in trying to understand better all these issues. So I'm a reader, Ian, and thank you for your question. Thank you, yours, Brendan, as well. I think what how shall I put it? I don't think that one thing excludes the other, right? I think that there is room for relationships country to country or country to group of countries, and for a relationship between a country and the EU as such. We are not jealous, we are not exclusive about our relationship, and in fact there are things you can do with ones that maybe are more difficult with the others, and vice versa. So we see room, and I think we should be creative enough to allow that. Take the case of the JCPOA, right? Only a few countries of the EU are there, but the EU is there as well. And the High Representative, in fact, coordinates the JCPOA. I followed all that when I was in Washington with Cathy Ashton, by the way, playing a major role in creating conditions for the signature of it. And we had a few countries, not all the 27, but the 27 were fully behind, 28 at the time, they were fully behind Cathy Ashton. The JCPOA would never have happened without European sanctions against Iran. You agree with me? Sanctions in Europe are not national sanctions. Economic sanctions have to be, community sanctions for obvious reasons. So you had I think JCPOA is a good example where national and community dimension can play a complementary role. The E3 is, of course, part of the JCPOA. It's now a different E3 because, of course, Britain is out. I think it has merit and it has potential, and the more the E3 action is linked to the EU, the more potential it has. So complementarity in both. There are a few things you cannot do with the E3 that you can only do with the EU. I mentioned economic sanctions in the case of Iran. Other issues that the EU has a capacity to act that complements very well the national capacity to act of our own member states. So I see potential for both to coexist, different formulas to coexist.
Couldn't one turn the argument on its head, really? It's sort of the logical extension of what you're saying, and accept that actually what we really need is E2. In other words, direct relationship, United Kingdom, the European Union. I mean, in many ways, the things that have been most important to the UK over the last few years to do with trade in Northern Ireland have all been dealt with not primarily bilaterally, but directly with the EU. So how would you react? I mean, this is now a piece of fantasy, but how would you react if the UK government were to say, we will actually only recognize you, João Vale de Almeida, and we will have only one representative in Brussels, and then reduce everybody else to consular level? Wouldn't that be the logical conclusion?
I don't think you would wish me to find myself in that position. I think you a little bit ahead of time, I would say, that proposal. Our concept is different. Our concept is complementarity. So what I do here is that I'm the convening actor, if you want. We host, I chair and host a regular meeting of EU ambassadors in London. My colleagues chair and host meetings of different formations of councillors. And through that mechanism, we maximize our capacity to understand, to influence, to analyze, to propose. And this is the way we think it should work in the present status of integration in the European Union. And I can tell you, and this is the third ambassadorial post I have, it works pretty well in a bilateral way, in a bilateral context, but also my experience of the UN was very clear about it. We are 27 countries, each of them with a specific, let's say, contribution to the collective capacity to act of the European Union, and the European level adds by creating cohesion and increased capacity at the collective level. So it's quite a creative, and it's a totally unique construction, as you know very well. There's nothing else like this in the world, and it's not working too bad if I look at the history of the Union and how much we have evolved.
Now, there are quite a lot of questions coming in on the Northern Ireland issue, and also more generally on the position of the UK, particularly Scotland. So we've got one from the United States, in fact, from Garrett Fitzgerald, who's asking about Northern Ireland, and from German Bruera, who's asking about Scotland. I'm going to roll the two questions together, but essentially they're asking whether what's been happening over the Brexit relationship, and partly also as a result of EU policies, we now have a situation in Northern Ireland where there's been considerable communal unrest. There's the possibility of Northern Ireland separating from the UK, and in Scotland, of course, as a result of Brexit, there is the possibility of a vote, also probably a much larger one, of Scotland separating from the UK and then seeking re-entry, so to speak, into the European Union. So the question is, what are your views on the chances of an independent Scotland rejoining the EU? And then more broadly, how will the EU stop itself, because of course it is a good friend of the United Kingdom, from being an unwitting agent of the dissolution of the United Kingdom? Those are the questions.
Well, I think there are two rules of the game for any good diplomat. One, no interference in internal affairs of the host country. And secondly, no comments on hypothetical scenarios, particularly if they relate to the host country. So I have a triple reason not to go too much into replying to your question. But let me say, because I know there are Scottish friends listening to us, and I'm engaged with many discussions with Scottish friends, to say that we enormously respect their commitment of many Scottish people to European Union, to European values, to what we represent, and I have excellent relations with all of them, and I appreciate their commitment to our union. This being said, on the particular case, hypothetical scenarios with several ifs, I have to restrain my comments for reasons that you would understand.
Thank you. I wonder, is there another way of addressing this problem, which really comes from the sense that there's a European identity experienced by many people on the island of Ireland, but also in the UK more broadly, this European identity which has been lost by the 48%, of course, who voted against Brexit. What do you think the possibility would be for the European Union to create some kind of European citizenship which wouldn't be tied to a member state, which could then be given to people in the United Kingdom who still felt this European identity, so that they could access the benefits of the European Union, having once been members, so that they would be in a rather different situation, of course, as you yourself said, from people who have yet to join the European Union.
Listen, I've heard that idea. It's been communicated from different people. I don't have an official position on that. I think my line of replying to you is to rather look at what we have and try to make it work. And what we have today is these two agreements that we've been talking about. There's enormous potential there, maybe not as much as some would have liked, and certainly those who voted against Brexit, but even those some who voted for Brexit may have wished to have more there in terms of capacity to participate in EU programs. There's a lot of talk about the exclusion from Erasmus and other issues. So, but that's your debate. That's the British debate. I don't want to interfere. My point is, regardless of those missing points, or that some people consider to be missing elements of that, these two agreements contain an enormous potential. I mean, these are the most ambitious, the TCA particularly, the most ambitious agreement that we ever signed with a third country. The same is valid for the United Kingdom. The width, the depth of it raises and creates enormous possibilities. I think our focus now should be to make it work in the best possible way to the benefit of citizens and business. I think this is our task. And then we'll see how this relationship will evolve. Again, these are dynamic processes, as the Brexit has demonstrated, right? And I don't want to anticipate the future. I think our focus, my focus at least, and my team here at the Smith Square, Westminster, where I hope that I can host you soon, all of you, is our focus is on making these agreements work in the best possible way.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, what I'm thinking of here is really something similar to what happened between the Irish Free State, later the Irish Republic, and the United Kingdom after separation. So people from the 26 counties enjoyed and enjoy all the rights of UK citizens when they're in the UK. So I'm a beneficiary of that, for example. And initially that wasn't reciprocal. That was simply something that the UK extended to Irish people. So eventually it became reciprocal. So I think it might be, I realize you've answered on this, but I just submitted as a thought that it might be something for the European Union to think about in the future to help to restitch the relationship. But there's another question come in. It's the last one on Ireland. It's from Dr. Anita Bunyan, who's the Director of Studies in Modern Languages at Gonwell and Keyes College here. And she says that she notes that the initial checks on the sea border seem to have been more intensive than the ones on other EU-UK borders. And in fact, they amount to quite a large percentage of checks overall. And what she wonders is whether it's now time for the European Union to adopt a more pragmatic and politically sensitive approach to these border checks.
Well, on the numbers that you mentioned, I've seen a few numbers circulating that are not accurate. The latest numbers I got from our experts is very much the proportionate numbers given the size of trade and all that. So I think my advice would be to be very critical regarding some figures that are being circulated that do not reflect reality. This being said, let me make a wider point. And I think we need to keep this in mind when discussing the situation in Northern Ireland. When Brexit happened, and when the government chose a formula of Brexit that implied withdrawal from the single market and the customs union, I think we all knew that this would be the most intricate problem to solve. I used to say that it's like squaring a circle. I mean, you had to, on one side, prevent a hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland as a condition for success for the Good Friday Agreement. Secondly, you had to respect the constitutional order of the United Kingdom, of which Northern Ireland is an integral part. And thirdly, and not less important, we had to preserve the single market. The single market by definition has to have borders, and borders need to happen somewhere. And the red lines on the British side, the kind of Brexit they chose, clearly pointed to the border having to take place between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And that was the basis for the protocol, which was negotiated between us, signed, and is now British law and EU law. And law should be respected. During that negotiation, All alternatives were studied, put on the table, discussed, and at the end of the day disregarded, because for one reason or the other, they would not solve the problems to the satisfaction of the two sides, right? So there is today, even after the negotiation, even as we speak, I didn't see anybody yet proposing a real alternative to the protocol. So if that is the case, we have to conclude that the protocol is the solution and not the problem. The problem was created by Brexit and by the withdrawal from the single market and the customs union. And if this is the only solution for that problem, we have to make it work. Now, when we make it work, we of course need to do in an intelligent, in a balanced, in a reasonable way. And that is what we are trying to do. But to reach that sort of intelligent way of managing this protocol, we cannot go against the law. We are a community of law. Imagine that we would violate the law in Northern Ireland, in one part of our border. You know, people could go to the Court of Justice in Luxembourg, in other parts of the Union, say, why are you having a discriminatory treatment as compared to other elements of the border of the single market? So the rule of law, you know, we have to respect that principle. So we are bound by that, and we are bound by the terms of the protocol itself, which is also law, which has happened to have been agreed between the two sides. So within those limits, I can guarantee you, and I can guarantee our friends in Northern Ireland, which I visited in September, and I'm in touch with all political forces, business and beyond. I can tell all my friends in Northern Ireland that they can count on the European Union to continue to support the peace and reconciliation process in Northern Ireland. We were supporters from day one. We are still there supporting a number of programs to help the peace and reconciliation. So I can guarantee you that, but I can also guarantee that we will show the maximum possible flexibility. We are not here to create problems to people in Northern Ireland. We are here to finding solutions for the problems created by choices made by the United Kingdom. Let's be very clear about that point. But as I was saying earlier, I'm encouraged by what I've seen in the technical and political context in the last few weeks, addressing some of the issues that have been identified and trying to find with the British authorities, roadmaps, work plans, timelines for decisions to be taken. It has to be a consensual one. It cannot be unilateral action. As you know, the British government took some unilateral decisions that led us to launch legal procedures. The spirit and the letter of the protocol and the withdrawal agreement need to be respected. Within that, I can guarantee you that the European Union will show the flexibility that it can in order to address those problems.
Thank you. A question just widening out the perspective a bit and going back to the co-management of problems between the UK and the EU. Do you see any merit in ideas that are coming out of the United States for the concept of a tripod for the West that would be based on three pillars: the United States, the European Union, and the United Kingdom? Is that something that would appeal to you?
Yeah, let me give you a personal reply to this one. I'm not engaging the European Union on this reply, but I'm a staunch transatlanticist. Let's put it this way, if I may. I've been invested there. I think there's a rationale for transatlantic cooperation in terms of values, in terms of interests. So I believe that we can do more and better. We are very encouraged by the new American administration. The European Union is enthusiastic about capacity to re-engage with the United States. And of course, I think what I've been saying is valid for the United Kingdom. And I know the commitment of the British commitment to transatlantic relations and alliances and all that. So I think we share a lot in terms of the way we see the world. We share a lot of geography because we are part of the Atlantic region. So I think there is potential for this cooperation. Maybe it could also involve our friends in Canada as well and beyond. So, but I think there's a potential there for us to engage. Of course, we will continue to engage bilaterally with UK, bilaterally with the United States, but maybe there is room for more than that. Yes.
So I'm afraid we're beginning to run out of time, but we only have, I think, scope for one more question. It's a very good one from Andrew Holmes, who's an alumnus of Magdalen College here. And he notes that there are separatist challenges, not merely in the United Kingdom, but also in other parts of Europe, in Italy, but particularly also in Spain. And of course, we know that you won't comment on domestic matters, but he does ask whether, just in general, whether you think that an EU with sort of 40 members, some of them broken away from other existing member states, whether that would be even workable, whether there's sort of a point after which actually the machinery becomes ineffective.
I'm not sure I fully grasp the question, but the European Union is a union of states and a union of peoples, right? That's our construction. So the national dimension is very important. Member states are the basic component of the union. There is a citizen dimension, of course, because there is a direct election of the European Parliament and other mechanisms of translating the will of the people. So that's how we are built. But of course we have full respect for the national sovereignty, for the capacity of states to run their own business. The European Union as such does not interfere in this kind of situations. At the same time, we promote region-to-region cooperation. We have no borders inside the union, so the dynamic is quite peculiar. So, as far as the internal composition of member states, this is not a matter for European competence, clearly.
Thank you. There's so much to talk about, but I'm afraid that's all we have time for this evening. I would like to thank Your Excellency very much indeed for your splendid lecture, and to thank you, the audience, for your questions. If you enjoyed this discussion, please do follow us on Twitter at CAM Geopolitics and check back on our websites to stay updated with our work. The video recording for this event will be uploaded to www.cfg.polis.cam.ac.uk shortly. The Centre has also just launched a new podcast, Cambridge Geopolitics Conversations. Episodes can be found on our website or wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube. Goodbye.
Thank you.